Hi, and welcome back to In at the End, a podcast about The Sopranos where I'm Val.
I'm Alex.
And we watch episodes of The Sopranos together and then immediately sit down and record a podcast about them.
Yeah.
So this is mostly, as usual, a mix of our reactions, our thoughts, some of our theories and ideas, some theories and ideas of other people. And
this is about Boca.
Yeah, episode 9 of season 1.
Yes.
So, yeah, where do you want to start?
Well, I think there's a lot of things going on in this episode. I definitely had some theories that I thought were kind of continued throughout the whole episode in terms of color and absence of color, use of blacks and whites. There's a lot of examples of, but I'm wondering if there's anywhere where you want to start before I get into a whole thing.
Maybe let's come to that a little bit later. Let's
Okay.
talk about some of like the overarching themes, and that'll, I think, lead us nicely into the color
Sure.
thing. So, you know, we're not going to cover all the plot, obviously, but really we have these couple storylines in this episode, right? We have the storyline of Junior / Corrado. I want to talk a little bit about names afterwards. I had a thing going on. But we have Junior going down to Boca and also like revealing secrets about Tony, secrets being revealed about him. We also have the storyline surrounding Coach Hauser, the high school girls soccer coach, and all the drama surrounding that. And kind of as a side of that, like we have a lot of conflict between Artie and Tony. I think that's how I would sum it. Am I missing something there?
No, I think those are kind of the two parallel storylines that are going on.
Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. I kind of just want to maybe we can start with talking about Junior and Bobby if you want to, and kind of what happens with that storyline. Because when we were coming home tonight to watch this episode, and I knew we were going to watch Boca, I immediately had a very visceral remembrance of the scene where the final scene with Corrado and Bobby, where it's violent, but it's not violent in the same way that we see violence happen throughout the episode, right? So he puts a pie in her face, which is kind of this comedic trope, right?
Yeah.
But this wasn't funny. And you're just devastated by this scene.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating, and it seems pretty violent. The way that Corrado pushes it in her face, looking at the way that he's acting in that scene, the emotions that we feel are extremely violent and aggressive.
Yeah. And the whole thing, right, is centered around Corrado. So, we have secrets throughout this episode, but in this storyline in particular, right, the secret that Corrado is worried about being revealed is that he likes to go down to Boca.
Yeah. Go down to Boca.
He likes to,
Boca.
Yeah. There were lots of great oral sex puns, or whatever you want to call them. Not puns, but
Carmela did a great job.
Yeah. Oh, I love the one. So, yeah, so we're talking about Corrado's oral sex abilities. And we hear Carmela, my favorite line of the episode is when he says, they ask him, how was Boca? And he says, it was great. I don't go down enough. And then Carmela says, that's not what I heard. Which is a really awkward thing to say to your husband's uncle at the table. But of course, it's been this chain of gossip surrounding his skills, and which, for women, I think, and this is, maybe we can talk about this a little bit, for women, it's kind of like a natural topic of conversation in some ways. She's not talking about, how great he is at oral sex because she's ashamed of him or whatever. She's she's so happy, right? She loves this guy.
Right.
And she loves spending time with him, and he clearly brings her a lot of pleasure in her life. And so, yeah, is she a bit of a blabbermouth? Sure, right? She's talking to her nail lady, she's talking to all these people about, specifics about their sex life, which maybe is a little bit revealing. But at the same time, like, she views it as something that's very positive. She views it as something that other women see as positive. Other women are jealous of her for this.
Right.
But the thing with Corrado, right, is that he, in his world, in his circle, right, so there's her circle and her people. In his circle, it's somehow seen as being related to being gay. A Fanuc, which, again, just like Bobby, I don't really see the connection between those two things. But it's emasculating or degrading or holds these other connotations for him.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps it's seen as looking at like a loss of power in their world or something, and I think that that's a dynamic that's examined a lot on this show. And even in the context of this episode, there's an examination of what that information entails in terms of revealing it to people. And Junior's afraid that it is a loss of power and standing in the mob family, which ultimately it is. Tony gets the information and it kind of arms him with a weapon almost that he kind of weaponizes against him. And it's interesting to see in that golf scene when they start discussing it, Tony brings up that information in a very underhanded way, and they start kind of weaponizing these secrets that they have against each other. Both these kind of like loose lips sort of situations.
Yeah.
But both of them aren't really dealing with these issues head on. It's very underhanded, and it ends up being very kind of Machiavellian in terms of how they're using the information.
Yeah. And it's funny because they're like, in terms of, empathy, if you want to call it that, like, they're really both in the same boat, but that they don't seem to recognize that, right? They're just like using, like you said, like these words are weapons kind of things.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it doesn't even make any sense. I mean, in the conversation between Bobby and Junior, there's not really any logical conclusion that's reached in terms of why this can't be spread. It's just one of the rules.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about like rules and morals and things like that a little bit later as well. I guess, the comparison point that could be held is like both going to a therapist and going down on a woman are both seen as these kind of like emasculating or dangerous behaviors.
Yeah.
That both like put both of them at risk, right? Like that's the thing about like people's knowledge of either of those secrets really are threatening to both of them, right? Whether realistically or not, right? Like I think both of them view it as a real threat to who they are as people, right? Like who they are seen as in larger society.
And it's interesting to think about, perhaps it's like the ceding of control that we've talked about in previous episodes a lot, and how important that is to these main characters. And in a messed up way, in their own kind of misogynistic, kind of messed up worldview, ceding control to a woman is particularly problematic or something to them.
Right. Yeah. It's hard. I don't know. For me, it's hard to understand that. It's hard to, because I think we, like, even compared to when this show first aired, right, in 1999 versus now, like, both of those topics, like, both seeing a therapist and, oral sex, are both topics that are, like, more acceptable, if you want to call it that, to be discussed in the media, discussed in public, versus even back in before the millennium or whatever, like that there would have been a little bit more taboo to discuss. So,
and perhaps also both of those topics that are being looked at are a reflection of taboos within those two generations that belong to Corrado and that belong to Tony. I mean, the taboo of these sexual taboos for Junior's generation, and then the taboo against psychiatry is almost like an evolution of what isn't accepted, and as time goes on they kind of progress. So if we were to look at this now through the lens of 2018, obviously that's changed.
Yeah.
The views on all these things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, but maybe would still hold like in our older generations, right? If we
Yeah, and also these rules that they're following were formed in an older generation that they're trying to cling to. I think that's what the show is examining.
Yeah. There's so many references to mouths in this storyline. Not so much in the other storyline, really. Like, it doesn't seem to kind of like carry over as much, but definitely like the title Boca, right, referring to the mouth. And we see we have a lot of emphasis on the mouth. So there's a lot of great shots. Like, for example, like when Bobby's feeding Junior red peppers in bed, and then he's later eating them. when Bobby is talking to her esthetician, if you will, about what was going down in Boca. She makes the sign of like locking her lips with a key kind of thing. So like, and there's references to like even she says it to Junior when they're dancing in that very romantical scene. Like about loose lips, and he's like not too loose. There's all sorts of innuendo going on there. We also see, we're gonna look this up. Darn. Okay. Well, we think maybe the art behind Tony and Carmela's bed is different than it has been. And I need to check in on that. Maybe we'll get back to you next week. But it's these 4 women standing in a circle, like whispering to each other. It's very
specific reaction and emotion being worn on the face. There's one person who's clearly getting consoled by another woman in front. There's another woman who's kind of like looking down. Yeah. It's really interesting. And I know like that kind of classic art, Italian classic art, is always in the background of the soprano
but bedroom. I don't think it's
there's
that
never
one.
Been, if it's not that, well, there's never been that kind of focus on it. It's very intentional. This scene where
I feel like it used to be like floral.
I think it is people, but there's never been that kind of focus on it. And that's really focused on prominently during the scene where Tony and Carmela are... Well, Carmela's revealing this secret of Junior to Tony.
I love that scene also. It's actually like a really lovely Carmela and Tony scene. We kind of get 2 of those. We're getting a little bit away from our topic, I guess. But we get 2 of these scenes where like, in the first one, when Carmela is revealing this secret after the dinner that they have, where Carmela makes that comment about Corrado going down to Boca, we have Tony kind of like tickling Carmela to get this secret out, and they're laughing. They find it really funny. Carmela has that wonderful line because he's like, Tony's then worried that Carmela's going to blab about him going down. And she's like, I forget exactly how she says it. She's like, once a year, I think I can resist the urge to gossip or something like that. It was great. But then at the end of the episode, we kind of have Tony being also kind of silly and light when he comes home super wasted.
Wow. I don't know if I would call that scene light.
Well, it's not light, but he's giggling, they're dancing. It's kind of this like, I don't know, I saw them as kind of connected in some way. I haven't quite worked out how, but
interesting.
But especially when he's lying on the floor and he's kind of like giggling kind of the way. Anyways.
Maybe. For me, that's almost like a kind of like blackened reflection of that, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not saying they're the same. I'm saying they're related.
Yeah. That scene has a lot of gravity for me. I think that Tony's
let's
with a lot of things.
Yeah, let's come. Like we'll talk about that scene after too. But, anyways. Yep. I'm trying to think anything else we wanted to say about the Boca. Oh, I also the one thing I love about when they're in that scene that's framed by these 2 shots. The Sopranos autopsy guy talks a lot about these cuts. I remember he talks about like there's like a zoom in focus, and then there's that weird freeze frame at the end of the scene.
Edit.
But anyways, in that scene when they're dancing and they're laughing and they're having this great time in Boca, there's a Fed there or someone there who's reporting back. He's saying like, Corrado, Soprano, 2,200 hours or whatever, spotted, blah, blah, blah. And so I loved that because the secret that Junior's really worried about in this episode is not the one that those guys are focused on, right? No. Like he's focused on these like much larger issues, but Corrado's the most worried about this secret about him having, giving oral pleasure is going to come out instead.
Right.
So I thought that was well done. And even that they've followed them, like we see kind of even though we don't know any of the feds yet, we see them kind of lurking around, right? Yeah. So we see that guy.
And we see them in the 2 feds in the back of the restaurant where Artie is with Tony, and he gets the guy to take off his baseball hat, and he comes back. He has the bottle of wine sent over. Yeah. But he also makes sure to get the 2 license plate numbers from the people on the table behind. And if you watch, you can kind of see them looking up and gazing over at the table, implying that they probably are agents.
Yeah, especially earlier, like even before Tony goes over with the hat. Like you actually see them watching more then, but you're not like kind of queued up to notice them.
Yeah, and even before,
unless you've seen this show a million times, then you are.
There's a lot of foreshadowing, though, in this episode in particular. That's a great example. Right away, you can see when Artie and Tony are talking and they're at the restaurant, those two are looking up in a kind of precarious way, and you can see that they're looking at them. There's other similar shots, like you have the scene near the beginning at the soccer game where you can actually focus on Ale and Coach Hauser.
Yeah.
And Ale's kind of walking around kind of melancholically and then
lackadaisically, if that's a better.
And then we go to focus, have a focus on Coach Hauser's face, an interaction between the two of them, kind of like a unspoken bond that's referred to right off the top, which isn't something that you necessarily pick up on
unless you've seen this show a million times.
Also, Jimmy Altieri. We have a scene when he's coming over in Green Grove, and they're talking about the supply chain. Tony brings up the supply chain, and there's a super long focus on Jimmy Altieri.
Yeah, it's like just too long. Like it makes you, at least if you know what's coming.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, again, not to harp on things that are coming in the series, but there are foreshadowing elements that we see in this episode that are kind of representing what's to come.
Yeah. The other thing that I was focusing on here is kind of like and maybe this will kind of like lead us into the topic of the other half of this episode, perhaps. We have a lot of talk here, or like we have a lot of images, and we had a lot of talk about like the rules, or so like even when Junior and Bobby are talking about oral sex, he says like, I don't make the rules. We see one of my favorite shots, and maybe this will get into your black and white stuff too. We open the episode with a lot of focus on that referee, right? Who's like someone who is supposed to make black and white. They wear those black and white stripes. They're supposed to make these very like clear-cut calls, right? And we see like Tony and Silvio and Artie are all kind of uncomfortable or upset with the fact that he's making these very like clear-cut, like he's giving people yellow cards. He's like throwing them out there, and they don't like that. They don't like that kind of black and white stuff.
And yet they're constantly engaging in black and white decisions themselves. It's just from their perspective.
Yeah. Even the referee like putting Silvio in his place, being like, it's my field, get off the field, right? We have, like I said, like those cops. We have the whole conflict that Tony goes through later in the episode. Maybe we'll get to that. With like deciding, you know, is he going to call the cops or isn't he?
I think that's the central question of this episode, this question of justice. And I think that is reflected by use of color pretty strongly in the episode. But I think the core question is, what is justice? Who is it for? And in the end, when Tony decides to not solve it himself, he's kind of responding to that statement from Melfi earlier on, where she's asking, you know, why do you, Tony Soprano, need to be in charge of deciding all of these things? You know, we have Arthur saying he deserves to die.
I like how we both wrote that down.
And how quickly they turn after that. How quickly everything changes in terms of their relationship with the coach. But I think the question is, who feels better? It comes down to Artie's, you know, little exchange with Tony right before the end of the episode. Who feels better? It's us. Does it help the daughter? Well, no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And Tony taking on this kind of vigilante role of solving these problems is a very kind of like black and white response to these issues that are actually quite complicated. And even for something as clear cut as a coach having a relationship with a teenager in grade 11, the show does take efforts to introduce elements that confuse the situation and make it more complicated. She was consenting. She was, not that was appropriate or allowed, or
not that 16-year-olds can consent to
but there
officially.
There is exactly. There are just little things that are thrown in to just kind of complicate the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Even the age of, I was going to say, like, I caught myself there. Even like something like an age of consent is a moral decision that like society has like decided on kind of like arbitrarily in a lot of ways, right? Like, who's to say that before whether it's, 16 or 18 or whatever it is in your state, right? Like, who's to say that before that you are consenting and are not consenting, and after that you are consenting? And I think we deal with a lot of these more like morally relative questions, right? We deal with, like you're saying, like it's never black and white in this show. Nothing is black and white in this show.
Yeah.
And this episode, I think, like really clearly is delving into that issue of like, like how people like Tony Soprano, who are considered by many people in the public to be relatively immoral people, what happens when they feel like they're making good moral decisions, right? Or that they are morally superior than others, right? And who can say that they're morally superior to someone else?
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, and I think like you maybe might come out on another side than me on this, is Charmaine Bucco implies, and you said roughly that, like, she implies that they're being selfish, right, by pursuing that vigilante justice. I don't know. For me, like, I don't really know where I stand. I'm just kind of thinking it out as we talk, but like, I don't know if that is selfish. Like, they're putting them had they done something to the coach, right? They're putting them, like, there's lots of people who would have known it was them. Yeah. Right? They're putting themselves out. Yeah, I mean, well, Charmaine definitely knew. Artie would definitely know. We had Christopher, like, stealing the dog. And so we had these kind of, like, minor infractions, right? But, like, people would have.
Yeah, but I think that's the business of the mob in New Jersey, too. That's kind of the unspoken rule, is that everybody kind of knows what's going on. Everybody knows who these people are, what they do, but they get away with it. Yeah, and maybe so, but that's kind of like the question, right? Like, is it selfish? There's so many things that bad people, like, again, bad is a really, whatever word, but like, there are so many things that people do to each other that hurt each other, and they get away with it, right? Yeah. This whole episode was actually making me think a lot about, like, the #MeToo movement. Yes. In a lot of ways, too, right? Because if we think about justice and we think about, like, trying to solve a problem like this, like this coach sleeping with this girl, with Allie, how does Allie get justice for this, right? So, and I think, like, in a lot of ways, like when Silvio said, or I guess Sil and Tony were both there, and they were like, what's going to happen if we call the cops? He's going to get 2 years and then move to Saskatchewan and then teach girls soccer all over again, right? Tony even talks to Melfi about, like, that, like, oh, well, we'll just, like, we'll put him in psychiatry and then we'll have sympathy for him, right? It deals a lot with the perpetrator, and that's the thing, like, with the Me Too movement, like, people have been really, like, considering very heavily the impacts on these perpetrators of violence and sexual violence as opposed to the victims, right? So how does Allie get justice? I don't know. Yeah. And so for me, like, there's flaws in our justice system. Our justice system is not based on moral relativism. Our justice system is based on these, like, very black and white views of things, which in some ways then it makes it hard when you fall through the cracks. But is it preferable to push these questions off to the legal system as opposed to killing somebody in response?
I'm not arguing that, like, killing someone is good. That's, however, like, who gave them the permission to be, like, the dealers of what's moral and what's not, right? Like, who gives our legal system that power? It's people who give them that power, right? So, if you really believe in that philosophy, right? If you believe that there are things that are morally relative, maybe in some situations that is the best decision. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's what I would choose. To have a
vigilante response?
Yeah. I think other shows deal with this as well. Like, I mean, Dexter, which is like a, poor man's version of The Sopranos. Very much so. But sorry, it was entertaining. But, like, so when and we don't know from this episode either, like, if the justice system fails here, like, maybe he does go to jail for a really long time. We don't get to see that play out. So maybe it maybe they made the right call with, kind of destroying this dude's family. And they talk about like what's going to be the impact on his wife and his daughter, right? Because his daughter's also on the soccer team, right? So other people are hurt. There's other collateral damage to calling the cops on this guy.
Yeah.
Obviously, if her dad died, there would also be collateral damage there, right? But when you examine like all the what are like all the possible impacts and look at and weigh who's impacted, in what way, it's not always black and white. And I don't know if justice is always served. I don't
think it ever is. I think that's what the show is examining.
Yeah,
some of these things seem black and white. Even something like this.
Yes.
This is almost one of the most black and white possible scenarios you can imagine. In terms of, this is something that is clearly not okay and is clearly a major offense.
Yeah.
And yet the response to it is very complicated. And there can't necessarily, it's difficult to have a black and white response to something like this. Because if it's that definite, who's setting the rules? And I think that at least deferring to the legal system, that's a set of rules that everybody has at least tacitly agreed to abide by. And I think that that's better than to passing this along to Tony Soprano and his crew,
right,
and their sense of morality to solve a problem like this.
I'm not relying on them to be the new legal system in the world. But I think the question for me is like, who's worse, Tony or Coach Hauser?
Interesting question. There might not be a real... How do you come up with an answer to that?
I don't know, right?
You can't weigh these things similarly because it isn't black and white.
Yeah.
But also in terms of the question of justice, is the just response to all the things that Coach Hauser did death? I think most people would probably argue not.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe many would argue that it is, but I don't think that's Tony Soprano's call.
No, but again, it's someone's, I guess the thing about it, and it's a philosophy, you don't have to ascribe to it, but it's questioning whether Tony is the one to be making these decisions is good. It's good to ask that question, but we don't often question our legal system and say, are these the people that should be making these decisions, right?
Yeah.
And arguably there's Tony's really shitty, but there's lots of shitty people out there who society views as good and deserving of making decisions, right?
Yeah.
So you can see that kind of even with Corrado's lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? And I always think lawyers are such interesting, I was once told that by a lawyer that I should work under the table. So they're not always the most, I don't know what the right word is, moral guides, right, in this legal system for sure. But yeah. But then what I was gonna say was we see Artie. Artie's such a great character. I mean, I just love Artie Bucco. And we see him in this episode, I think, reflecting a lot of what's going on, right? Because when Artie and Tony are having dinner together and they're at that restaurant and Tony sees that guy wearing a hat, which is a huge affront to him, right? It's in a nice restaurant. Artie's on board. Artie's really feels the same way. He's no one has any values today. Our standards are crumbling, right? And when Tony goes up to that guy wearing a hat and intimidates him into taking off his hat, he wasn't violent, but he was definitely scary.
Yeah.
And he buys him a bottle of wine later. That was, but it's kind of he's this, he wants to stand up for this, moral code. Whether or not it's what we consider to be moral, Tony has a moral code. It doesn't mean good morals, there's no such thing as good morals or bad morals. They're just morals.
I think that what that question that comes up in the restaurant brings up is that's something that both Artie and Tony agree, and the waiter, is bad.
Yes.
And I think that the question isn't so much about, it is about the moral code, but it's a lot about these characters deciding this is right, this is wrong.
Yes.
This is the right response, this is the wrong response. These very two-dimensional responses to the world. And what this show does is it breaks that down, and it shows that everything is multidimensional. All these characters are very complicated. They're all multidimensional characters with a lot of complexity. They have a lot of good things going for them. They have a lot of bad things going for them. And interact with the world, which is also incredibly multidimensional. There's a lot of complexity. There's good and bad things. And some of these characters try to respond to it in a way that is completely one of two options.
Yeah.
And we start to see that break down.
In some ways in the world, right? Like just for our brains, we have to do that, right? Like it's a way, it's like in order to make sense of the world, you kind of do have to position yourself between like these polar poles.
Yeah. Let me bring up some examples I found, because there's a lot going on. I think the use of colors and the use of black and whites and sometimes grays is really pronounced. And I think a lot of the time it reflects these decisions between the right answer and the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So in the very beginning of the episode, we have on the soccer field, we have the coach with this very red shirt for the soccer team. We have Artie with a red hat and a green shirt, color. All of the gang members, all of the mob family. I don't know.
We're watching, not watching The Wire. Yeah.
So all the members of Tony's crew are wearing blacks, grays, and
I thought Sylvia was wearing a tank top, like a wife respecter tank top.
It's a lot of combinations of whites and blacks, and sometimes coming together to be grays.
Okay.
And we see it just kind of again and again. I think it kind of establishes this color language. When they go to the Bada Bing shortly after, again you have the color that Artie and the coach are wearing, and again the crew's wearing kind of all gray, and we have Vin Makazian come in who introduces this new information relating to the kind of the underworld.
The indictments and
all gray. We have Junior when he goes to see his lawyer. They're all wearing grays, all blacks and whites. The only one I think where I saw any color was the lawyer, who was wearing a three-piece suit with a vest with a tie that had some reds on it.
Okay.
So kind of like hidden underneath, but at least dealing with this outside world. As soon as Junior goes down to Boca and meets up with Bobby, they're wearing the most colorful shirts I could possibly imagine.
Yes.
Satin blues, greens. He's kind of getting away from that world.
Yeah.
He's trying to kind of escape. And that's actually...
I like that.
Yeah. And even when he's... Yeah, so when he's down there, they have that funny edit kind of coming back. And right after that, they actually go to the Soprano house where they're watching a
black and white movie.
They're watching a black and white
History Channel.
History Channel,
yeah.
Which is actually like on Roman columns, this kind of like classic infrastructure, Italian infrastructure that's holding it up in black and white. That's kind of coming away from this colorful world. Also in the scene with the hat, that's probably some of the most pronounced examples. We have a focus on the waiter right away to set up the scene, who's wearing a tux, all black and white, black bow tie. When Tony goes over, again, like grays, he is wearing some color underneath the suit in that scene. But when he goes over to the table with the man in the hat, they are wearing everything is black. Black hat, black shirt.
Even the woman?
In black cocktail dress.
Oh, wow.
And this is like, they see this is bad.
Yeah.
Take it off.
Yeah.
It's like, this is wrong. So he takes it away. As soon as he walks away, there's kind of this white statue in the background after he's gotten him to take off the hat. Right. And we actually see another scene.
In Artie's backyard.
There's actually, I'll get to it because there's even more scenes. When we have Coach Harris, Paulie, and his goons all show up at his house to bring the TV, they go back into a line of two completely black cars.
Right.
So Coach Hauser seeing this now is this kind of like completely, he's standing up to this. This is wrong.
This is wrong. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Actually, in the line from Melfi, why do you, Anthony Soprano, always have to set things right? Then there's actually an edit immediately to the Bada Bing sign, all black and white. Yeah. And
those bees in the Bada Bing sign that have nipples on them.
I know. So there's a little bit of nipple color.
They're very disturbing. I didn't remember that. I remembered like the woman in that, but I didn't remember that the bees were boobs.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That was a great point. So then actually getting back to that white statue, this was actually a really interesting scene where Artie is saying he won't get away with this about Coach Hauser to Charmaine. And Charmaine says, goes into this kind of speech about the selfishness of those actions.
Yeah.
Artie's wearing a black shirt, and there's another white statue right next to him that actually looks almost identical to the one
yeah, it's like
in
the same
restaurant.
statue.
And there's actually the shot that leaves that scene is like Artie in a garden wearing a black shirt with the white statue next to him. It's this like garden of good and evil.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like ruminating with these questions.
Well, he's using Bug Be Gone.
Well, that's really interesting. He asked for Bug Be Gone, the pesticide, which refers to what Tony was asking for from, now this is some real deep Sopranos trivia questions.
From
the dad
AJ's...
of AJ's nemesis in school. I forget his name. Anyway, his dad, he sees him and he's asking for the pesticides with DDT to get rid of his he's like, this is what I want. I just want to kill it.
Yeah.
And now Artie's asking for this Bug Be Gone. They're kind of, revisiting this symbol of the pesticide.
Yeah.
Let's kill it. Let's just get rid of these problems.
Yeah.
And Charmaine is a much more nuanced response to that.
I also love Charmaine.
Also wearing color every time.
She's wearing purple or something.
Wearing purple shirt in that. And actually when she comes, there's another scene where she's coming down the stairs. Again, color. Mm-hmm. So she has a much more broad view of these issues. Mm-hmm. She's not seeing them as this is right, this is wrong. It's more complicated. She's taking everything in. And it's not selfish.
I don't know about that. Like, I don't know if Charmaine, like, I think she views Tony and all those guys as terrible. There's a line, I wish I had jotted it down. It's like when Artie's doing laundry, he's like washing his work clothes.
Yeah.
And when she comes down there, there's a strong, I wish I had written it down.
Strong what?
There's like a strong statement that she makes about those goons. I don't know. She calls them something.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that okay, maybe with other issues she has a more nuance. Like she's a very smart woman and she obviously thinks a lot about these issues, right?
Yeah.
They seem to have a very open relationship. She calls him at she knows he's at the Bing and she calls him there. So she's at least a little bit open-minded and trusting of Artie. But then she mentions something else about something that Artie would have had to have told her about the TV or something like that. I forget. Anyways, something that she would have had to have been told.
There, do you? Well, that's what she brings up.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. So I get that she's nuanced, but I think that she really thinks that she hates Tony.
She does.
And I think she's very black and white with Artie, what they're doing is bad.
All the characters are, but I think that she's factoring the complexities of how these actions are going to impact other people way more than other people. It's not like this solution, is going to solve everything. Mm-hmm. It's not white.
Yeah, sure.
This is bad, this is black.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what the white is for her. What I'm saying is she's not sure what white is.
I don't know if there is a white for her. There's an
okay.
existence of color.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors.
Yeah,
and I mean, if you think about what color is, it's, a combination of these lights,
Yeah, and white and black are both the absence of color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just a more nuanced, more multidimensional view. So actually, this all kind of culminates in the end after Artie has the exchange with Tony.
Yeah.
That leads him to not actually kill Coach
Right.
Hauser. Tony, as soon as Artie leaves, he throws an all-white plate.
cup,
completely crashes it. So his solution is gone now because there's been some examination of it.
Right, some critique of his...
And then he starts...
Freaking out,
but he starts zeroing in on the phone to make that phone call, and this black phone.
Well, because Tony's view of the cops is black.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're his
enemy.
Really.
Well, actually, I'm not sure if the phone signifies him calling the cops. It could, but it also could be signifying him calling Silvio.
Right. Yeah. And then when he does call Sil, you think he's calling to be
or he could be actually... it's actually probably him calling Sil to kill him.
Right.
He says, all they need to do is make the call.
Yeah.
So it's that they've actually established that symbol.
You're right.
I actually think that's what it's referring to.
I think you're right, yeah.
The phone is calling him to kill him.
Yeah.
And then actually what you have when he's wrestling with this on his own in that room, he starts playing with a purple 4-ball on the billiards table.
I noticed
which
that.
Also, another kind of duality, goes back to the beginning of the episode where Artie is talking about just shooting pool at the Bada Bing, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But now he's weighing this kind of color multidimensional option. And that's where he settles. He gets hammered to deal with it, and that's where the show ends up in this episode. Mm-hmm. But he's dealing with responding to problems in a way that he's not used to. It's a lot
Yeah.
less cut and dry, and he actually can't really deal with it.
Yeah. I love when he like acknowledges Melfi. Like we don't hear him acknowledge what she does for him a lot, but in his drunken state, he says to
Yeah.
Carmela, like, call the psychiatrist and tell her like the town's gonna give her an award or something. Like
A raise, I think.
or whatever it was. Like I
Yeah.
thought that was a great line, and like, and we know he does listen to her. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot.
That's a lot. There was a
in there.
lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot in that episode.
I just have like a couple
In fact,
smaller.
I think I probably just left some, but that's fine. Doesn't
That's
matter.
okay.
That's
Yeah,
enough.
look
That's
for
enough
blacks
black
and
white.
whites.
Watch the
They're
episode,
there.
you'll see it.
So here's something I want to run by you, and I just mentioned it. I wanted to talk about names. We see a lot in this show, like we like examine duality a lot, right? Like we've talked before about the shots of Tony's face, you know, from one side and the other.
Yeah.
This whole concept of black and white, arguably, is kind of looking at these dualities. But there was a line in this episode, and it was from Bobby / Roberta. And she says to Corrado, if only they knew the other side of you. And what I was thinking about in this, what I was noticing in this episode was how many characters go by two different names depending on who's talking about them. So one of the big ones that came out in this episode is Arthur and Artie. Only Charmaine calls Artie Arthur. And she says it a lot. She says his name a number of times.
In fact,
and so
I was gonna
you're
write it
made
down.
very
There's
aware of
another
it.
character who calls him Arthur, which I've never seen in the show before. I know. I was gonna write it down.
Oh, shoot.
I think one of Tony's crew calls him Arthur.
Oh,
at
well,
one
that's
point in this episode.
Okay. Well, that is, so. Let me say my
Yeah.
other ones, and then we can, and then tell me if you hear of more. So one of the other ones is AJ / Anthony, which is tricky because, of course, Tony's name is also Anthony. So we have AJ Anthony and Tony Anthony.
Yeah.
Or Tone.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
some people call him that, but. Because we have that weird scene with AJ. We'll talk maybe about that opening scene at the beginning of the episode. Which, anyways. So we have Artie Arthur, AJ Anthony, Tony Anthony. Then we have Junior and Corrado. And I can't track, like, it seems to be, like, interchangeable.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, Bobby calls him Corrado, but, like, Livia also calls him Corrado.
Yeah.
Most other people call him Junior.
Yeah.
Right? Including Mikey. Actually,
Yeah.
no, we hear Mikey call him both, I think. I should have kept better track. And then we have Bobby / Roberta. Corrado calls her Roberta quite a lot of the time. And then we also have AJ calling her Aunt Bobby or Aunt Bobby.
Yeah.
Which again is like another label put on someone, and then Livia shuts that one down and says that woman is not your aunt.
Yeah. In response to the story about bringing him a live piranha.
A live piranha, which was really such a great scene. But I don't know what you think about that, like about the name. I don't like. Are there any other characters you can think of that kind of have these dual names that are only used in different contexts? And like when you're like, when are you like, in what context are you Junior,
right.
and in what context are you Corrado, and are those two parts of your personality or your persona? Can you reconcile those both, right? So like and again in this episode, like, can Corrado / Junior reconcile this part of him that's very caring and intimate and soft in a lovely way? Can that person be the same person who later on in the episode, you know, puts a pie in Bobby's face and calls her a blabbermouth,
right?
Something.
Yeah.
Or the guy who, you know, orders a hit on his own nephew.
Yeah.
Right? Like, are those two pieces of him? Is Junior and Corrado, reconcilable is the only thing I can come up with. So that was something I was noticing.
Yeah. Also refers
I'm
to,
going to keep track of it.
Yeah, your relationship with your family, where you come from, what you're born to, what you become, and the different relationships you have and the different sides of yourself in different contexts.
Yeah, I just thought it was clear on this one. We saw a lot of dogs in this episode. Not a lot, but we have the dogs in the cemetery in that opening shot. We have the dogs, like the Coach Hauser's scene with the dogs earlier, and then of course we have like Chris with the dog.
Yeah.
I don't know how he managed to steal the dog.
That's pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive.
He's pretty good.
And we have that opening scene. I always feel like opening scenes are really important.
They are.
Because I made a mistake. I referred to the scene with, the soccer game as the opening scene, but the opening scene was actually in the cemetery at Johnny Boy's gravestone. And so AJ's chasing these cemetery dogs around, and he's telling jokes about dead people. He's not coming and saying a Hail Mary or whatever she asked him to do, and Our Father for his grandfather. He's running around. Junior's kind of standing by and keeping watch.
Yeah.
Livia is, she's like making comments about plastic flowers and there's weeds. And she says something, I forget exactly what she says to Junior, but kind of like, again, like one of these like this is a moral failure of society, basically, that, and Junior says, nobody goes down here anymore, which is funny if you think of it with the innuendo for the rest of the episode.
It's interesting. So even the way they frame that first shot of the cemetery, it's with the highways in the background with sound effects of cars zooming by.
Yeah.
Which is such a Soprano shot.
Yeah.
I mean, typically a show you would just see them in the cemetery, but they decide to have the highway, the infrastructure, the cars, and those sound effects happening during that scene. I also thought it was fascinating hearing Livia talk about my son, the mental patient, while right in front of a tombstone.
Right.
I mean, that's another great example of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Her throwing out this information about Tony, and going to see psychiatrist to Junior, also this relationship to death in the context of the whole first season is really interesting.
Yeah, huge. I thought it was I forgot about that opening scene, actually, and so that's why, even just in terms of my names thing, like how they have, we always hear about Johnny Soprano or Johnny Boy Soprano, but he had like a more full name on his tombstone.
That's right.
I should have written it down.
Yeah.
Anyways. Yeah. I only had like one other thing I kind of wanted to touch on. Did you have something that you wanted to...
I have a few things.
Okay.
Well, one actually, I have a few kind of stray things, but the one biggest thing that I have is the relationship between Tony and sports, and the relationship between him, Junior, and sports.
And Junior teaching him baseball.
Yeah, so Junior talks about how he missed that fly ball as a kid. Then the camera starts to zoom in.
Yeah.
We have a lot of focus on Tony and James Gandolfini
That's a great
acting.
Shot. Yeah.
It really affects him.
Yeah.
And that's actually what triggers him to bring up all this stuff about Boca.
Yeah.
And him going down, and this information that he has.
He becomes that like smiling evil person. Like, I love when James Gandolfini does that, when he's like being evil, but he's like smiling. It's so creepy.
But it's really interesting because we've talked about this before, actually, in the first episode where Junior talks about how, you could have been a varsity athlete, and how that was a terrible blow to Tony's self-esteem.
Yeah.
In this, you also have Junior talking about, he actually says, direct quote, Anthony wants to play games, and I taught him baseball.
Yeah, so I love that line.
We're really establishing, some symbols here. And it's really interesting how he responds to Junior by prodding him now with the information that he has, and then Junior responds with, at least I can deal with my problems.
Yeah.
So both of them are just incapable of dealing with these complicated emotions. And that ties back to when there's something that they don't like, they throw it on the other person. They go on the offensive. They attack. They use, critical weaknesses that they know about and kind of turn things around. But it's interesting to see both those characters coming from the family of two different generations throwing weaknesses at each other.
Yeah.
Typically, Tony's able to kind of manipulate a situation by throwing people's weaknesses at them.
Totally.
But that's a really interesting scene.
And we'll also come back to Tony's, sports career, too.
We certainly will.
Yeah. I loved seeing him and Sil and Artie getting, like, really worked up about this high school girls soccer game. Like, it really does show, I think, like, the importance of that to Tony in particular, right? Like, like they're like hugging each other when a goal is scored. Artie says that he would blow the coach, like which again is funny in the context. Funny in the context of the arc
of the episode.
Sure, like he's actually so saying he is going to, and everyone's down on. That's fine. Junior.
He's not a Fanuc, and everyone's down on Junior
for being such a Fanuc for going down on a woman. It's. I'm looking forward. What's that episode with Tony and his dreams about high school?
Oh, wow, that's really flashing forward quite a bit. I can't remember the name of the episode.
Me
but
neither.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
That's a pretty pivotal one.
Yeah, I forgot how much we hear about it before that episode, right?
Yeah.
Like I forgot how often it comes up from Corrado. And I forgot how often like it's like a part of that game playing, and you know, even in the flashback episode we had to Tony's childhood, right? Corrado's throwing him a baseball, right? Like it's good. Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to like again just kind of talking about like how taboo or like untalked about issues are dealt with. We have Allie, the girl who has been, you know, I would say molested by or coerced into sleeping with her coach. We have her cutting herself, right? Yes. When like Meadow and her friends are drinking together, and that's how Allie like deals with her problems, right? In terms of like Junior saying, at least I deal with my problems. Yeah. But like she's chosen this way to deal with her problems. Yeah. And we have this, you know, so then Tony later is talking about this with Melfi, right? And she's saying girls stay under a lot of stress. She talks about like whether it was a genuine suicide attempt or a cry for help.
Suicidal gesture.
A suicidal gesture, right? I find that all very interesting just in light of how that's dealt with in society, right? And again, it's one of these things where it's like it's not black and white. Like it's not going to be like, oh, it was a genuine suicide attempt or it was a cry for help or whatever you want to call it. It's going to be somewhere in the middle of those things, and so it's hard to define it in that way.
Yeah.
Just
that was
again,
an interesting
random,
shot, actually, how they got there. Meadow and her friend are looking for
her. Yeah.
They walk through a swing set.
Yeah.
Like an image of childhood and innocence.
Totally.
And they get there, and she's actually now on this kind of rocking swing chair. Yeah. So she's still a kid, really.
Yeah.
But there is kind of like a more grown-up connotation to that chair than the swing set where they're looking for her.
Yeah.
They're kind of, you know, more innocent. When even them drinking off in the corner looking for her, that's a more innocent, more kind of like youthful activity than the stuff that she has to be wrestling with.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Just a couple other asides, because I feel like we've been talking a long time and you have a headache, so.
I did have a migraine today, so if I've been a little bit loopy,
but we have to, if we watch an episode, we have to talk about it. Carmela calls Tony a cowboy, which again, I think I mentioned, maybe it was last week, about his love of Westerns and the fact that they were told that Johnny Boy was out being a cowboy in Montana when they was in jail. And being a cowboy, I don't know, we'll come back to that one. I just wanted to point it out. And then the one thing that I thought was really funny were the interactions with Mikey Palmise today. And Mikey Palmise is a ridiculous character.
Yeah.
I mean, I think underappreciated character. I don't think I really appreciated how
He's
ridiculous he is.
Yeah.
But he was getting really pissed off that people weren't following the proper protocol of golf.
Right.
And like shutting up while he was teeing off. Like he was like really upset. And he was upset about other things throughout this episode, but I thought that was, he said that they were lacking respect. Yeah. Which I thought was great, right?
Yeah.
And then we have that funny scene where Junior tells him that Tony's in therapy. And he's like, I knew it. And Junior's like, no, you didn't know it. I just told you. Yeah. Anyways, that's kind of all I have. Did you have anything you wanted to wrap up with?
That's really it. I mean, it's cool to see Robin Green and Mitchell Burgess, you know, as writers again on this with Jason Cahill. How they wrote that was funny. Jason Cahill and then Robin Green and then ampersand.
They're a duo. I think they mostly.
A team.
Yeah. They're a married duo, just like you and me.
But we're starting. Yeah, exactly. But you know, we're starting to see kind of like a core group of people that are writing and actually we've even seen some of the kind of core directors for this.
Yeah, because what was their other episode we've seen this season?
Down Neck.
The one that was just before the Ballad of Tennessee Moltisanti.
I think so.
Yeah. Also dealing a lot with like mouths and food and consumption and Anyways, interesting.
Well,
interesting.
Very interesting.
But yeah, I think that's all.
All right. Well, we'll see you next time.
Yeah. I don't know what's next.
Well,
but
we'll find out.
We'll watch it and then we'll talk about it.
Yep.
So thanks.
All right.